ahead.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Brooklyn Book Festival's Thursday night bookend event. My name is Kate O'Brien Nicholson. I am the director of Fordham University Press. This evening's conversation will focus on the role that university presses play in highlighting the work of authors who otherwise might have been overlooked. A conversation that directly ties into this year's University Press theme, Raise Up. A vital role of the University Press mission is to find and publish voices traditionally underrepresented in the publishing industry. This evening, you will hear from some of those voices and the editors who have provided these authors a stage to share their stories, speak their truth, and impact their communities. I encourage you all to ask questions throughout the presentation by selecting Q&A on the bottom toolbar of your screen. We will do our best to answer as many as possible in the time we have at the end of the presentation. With that, let's begin as I introduce the director of Fordham University Press and tonight's moderator, Fred Nachbaur.
Thanks, Kate. Appreciate the introduction. I'm delighted to be participating in this evening's discussion. The Brooklyn Book Festival is one of my favorite events of the year. In years past, I loved being outside and selling books and interacting with the crowd. There was always such energy in the air. I look forward to when we can go back to in-person events, but I'm glad we have the opportunity to gather this group to talk about the importance of University Press books, authors, and editors. As you mentioned, this ties into our University Press Week theme, #RaiseUp, which is meant to promote authors, subjects, and ideas that often get overlooked by commercial presses. Trade houses are looking for bestsellers and easily digestible content. University presses give a platform to authors who dig deeper and fill in the missing pieces in significant historical and cultural flashpoints, as well as writers of regional books that reach a general interest audience, including biographies and memoirs, raising the voices of the community. UP Week is November 9th to the 15th, and the Brooklyn Book Festival bookend event this evening gives us a great opportunity to jumpstart the promotion and offer viewers a better understanding of the work we do. Tonight, you will hear from editors and authors from Columbia, Fordham, and NYU presses. Let me introduce our distinguished panelists for this evening, and then we will kick off with some questions. Pamela Lewis, if you want to wave while I mention your name, that'd be great, is a writer and teacher and activist in New York City. She was born and raised in the Bronx and has taught for 17 years in schools in the South Bronx and Harlem. Her first book, Teaching While Black, A New Voice on Race and Education, is published with Fordham University Press. Eileen Kalish is an executive editor at NYU Press. With over 25 years of experience in academic publishing, she publishes books for general readers, scholars, and students. Her books have won over 100 book awards and are focused on issues of social justice, inequality, and current events. Jane Ward is professor of gender and sexuality studies at the University of California, Riverside, where she teaches courses in feminist, queer, and heterosexuality studies. She is the author of the new book, The Tragedy of Heterosexuality, as well as Not Gay, Sex Between Straight White Men, which has been featured in Newsweek, New York Magazine, Forbes, and more, both published by NYU. Eric Schwartz is the editorial director of Columbia University Press. He has a PhD in political science from the New School for Social Research and is acquiring editor for sociology and special projects. Lance Freeman is a professor in the urban planning program in the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation at Columbia University. He is the author of A Haven and a Hell, The Ghetto and Black America, published by Columbia University Press. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us this evening. So like I mentioned, I'm going to ask a series of questions aimed at either the editor or the author, and we'll ask you to respond. I'd like to remind the audience to use the Q&A section on Zoom to ask your own questions, and we'll leave time at the end to answer as many as we can. Okay, this is for all, and this year, as I mentioned, we have the theme of #RaiseUp for University Press Week to celebrate the work university presses do in publishing the work of authors and subjects who might not get such attention from a commercial press. What does the theme of Raise Up mean to you personally as an author or a staffer at a university press? So why don't we start with you, Pam, and then we'll go from there.
Oh yeah, this idea or concept of Raise Up to me is really, mind-blowing, because like we just finished saying, I honestly didn't know if I would be someone that would be allowed to, with the memoir, in the sense of how I've written it, if I would have even been accepted through any academic press. Just simply because of me being very grassroots and very, in the trenches. I'm a teacher, and I'm talking about teaching in the Bronx. And, I tend to think, even myself, I could only imagine what other people believe, that that's just not something that you would expect to hear. You wouldn't expect that that would be something that would be allowed. So, I honestly feel like it was an opportunity, not just for myself, but for that certain mass of people that meaning the parents, the teachers, the students that I teach, in the neighborhood that I teach, to get, the camera shown on them for sometimes we never do, right? Those voices sometimes never get heard. And, even within, I've read a few memoirs, and honestly, the reason why I even wrote it was because every time I read a memoir, I never checked if it was an academic press, but it probably wasn't. It was usually from a white woman talking about her experiences teaching in the hood.
Mm-hmm.
And then I honestly, that's why I wrote the book. I was upset about some things. I was very passionate about what I was doing. And I just felt like, where am I? You know what I mean? Where am I in this space? There are tons of Black women teachers and Black male teachers that teach in their community, and I don't see books from them. So thank you. I'm just very grateful that I was able to have that experience, to be able to not only write the book, but to have it published on this forum.
Great, thanks, Pam. And just to note, Pam's book came out a number of years ago, and it's now having a little bit of a resurgence because of the cultural moment and Black Lives Matter. So it's kind of it's timely a number of years later, which is great. Jane, do you want to offer your perspective as an author from NYU for 2 books?
Sure. Yeah, I think what your question makes me, what it brings to mind for me is that I sometimes feel neither here nor there, that the kind of books that I write might not be perceived as academic enough nor commercial enough. And so I have really appreciated the way that NYU Press has supported me to write a theoretically informed book, but that's also accessibly written. My goal is to reach a broader audience than an academic audience. I certainly have readers who are in my disciplines, who are other academics, but my hope often with the books that I write is to get a crossover audience. And I think because I've made that clear, and because NYU Press has been so supportive of that goal, and because they do such a great job with marketing and publicity, that's been pretty successful.
Great, great. And Lance, as a Columbia UP author, what you want to add your perspective? Oh, you're muted, Lance.
Yep, sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, for me, in many ways, I kind of would flip the dynamic on its head, and by that I mean, as an academic, we are charged with educating people with research, publishing, but quite often we get consumed with publishing in what are called peer-reviewed journals, right? That we kind of myopically focus on publishing in our, the top journals. And that's great and important, but your average layperson doesn't go to the library to pick up the Journal of Planning and Education Research, or doesn't have it delivered to their house. So ironically for me, in many ways, the university press I see it as a way of reaching a broader audience, and I'm really grateful for having that opportunity to sort of expand beyond the narrow confines of communicating with my peers, which was important, as I say, but not the same as having an opportunity to convey my ideas to a broader audience. I think that's really exciting. So for me, that's another way of fulfilling my educational mission, being able to speak to a broader audience.
Great. Thanks, Lance. And Eileen, do you want to add anything from the editorial perspective?
I mean, I just think that I am always looking for people who are speaking outside the box and that have interesting perspectives and engage with either interesting topics or ideas in new ways, and critically, and often with the framework of it's feminist, it's about inequality, it's about injustice, and that's there. And then I think about how can we take that book or message and bring that to the biggest audience, because guess what, that the bigger mainstream audience needs these wonderful ideas, and they need the conventional turned on its head. And often the people to do it are the scholars, the academics, the people that have been studying gender in the workplace. Well, they're the ones who could tell you all about Me Too, or Black Lives Matter. There are a lot of great political scientists who could talk about, or people that study policing who can talk about what is going on. And so, when I have a book like Jane and she wants to talk about heterosexuality from a queer perspective, what could be more fun to me, and how can we take that and just kind of run with it and do it in a way that can appeal, can bring people in and not make them confused or feel stupid, that's kind of the goal. And so, I think I have a great job because I get to play with those fun ideas and the fun people who, have them. So, I think the University Press just values all of that. I think that's where we're coming from.
Right. And Eric, anything that you want to add to the conversation?
Yeah, I would say that, really strong academic work is very nuanced. And, the answer I find for, nearly all great books that are published by university presses is that the world is more complicated than you think it is. And, to speak of a book like Lance's, you could take a very sensationalist approach to the Black Ghetto, and Lance's book is very nuanced in looking at both the pros and cons on a topic that isn't typically thought of that way. And as a result, it's a really strong work, and it's one that we're very proud to be able to publish, both because I think it's a really important book, and because also a way of supporting our local faculty at Columbia University. We always are looking for us, kind of part of the raise up is also how do we raise up our fellow colleagues who are in the faculty. And I should say that Lance's book won the Distinguished Book Prize this year, which is the best book voted by our faculty board, published by a Columbia University faculty member. It's always a very competitive prize, and congratulations, Lance. It's really super.
That's great. Yeah, and I just want to add one final thought on that. And because university presses and Fordham in particular, regional publishing is a strong part of our publishing program, and Fordham has the Empire State editions to give voice to the community. And we publish not only the academics, but people that are in the community, like Pam, who's a New York City public school teacher, and she has a voice to talk about her experience. And we have other authors that also contribute. So I think that's also an important part of the Raise Up theme, and working with the community. And Fordham is very proud of the fact that New York is their campus and Fordham is their school. It's like their whole model and motto, and they use it through their advertising, through their promotion on their website. So it's important for the press to tie into the mission of the university. And the Empire State Editions imprint does that really well. and it helps with advocacy with the university. And, you know, we are mission driven and we're supported by our university. So having that as part of the press's mission really helps, and it also ties in. And having authors like Pam and books like that are really important to our mission. So I just wanted to add that perspective, because it's slightly different than some of the more scholarly works that we also do. I mean, Fordham is a very theoretical list as well. So anyway, just wanted to make that point. So we'll move on to the next question. This one is aimed at the authors. One, and Lance, you had mentioned this, the peer review, which is really the foundation of university press publishing, both for the scholarly works, but even for the trade regional books, we still have to get our manuscripts peer reviewed. It's part of the protocol of publishing with the university press. If you're a member of the Association of University Presses, you have to get your work peer reviewed. So we have a certain series of questions for the scholarly works, and then a different set of questions for more of the trade, general interest regional books, but they are peer reviewed. So one of the ways UPs work best in this regard is the use of peer review to vet and validate new ideas and groundbreaking work for publication. How do you feel about the peer review process? For your most recent book, did it change anything about the way you work or write? So why don't we start with you, Lance, who you brought that comment up.
Yeah, I value the peer review process. I see it as a way of, getting feedback, getting, free advice, if you will. So I really value the peer review process. I think it changes the way I write in the sense that I'm kind of anticipating, what might a reviewer say about that, and how would I answer that question. So I guess I kind of go into the project anticipating it. I would say that, writing a manuscript as opposed to an article, it's a much more ambitious undertaking. In some ways, it's much more risky. An article might be 20, 30 pages, and obviously you don't want that rejected, but it's not like a significant part of your life, if you will. Whereas a book manuscript is, a significant commitment. So, in many ways, it's very validating, if the peer reviews are relatively positive, because you've put so much effort into, writing a book manuscript and thinking about it, years. So it definitely was something that I appreciate, but, I approach it with some trepidation, because in the end, you don't know what your peers are going to say. So, I approach it with trepidation, but it's something I value. And I think it does help, it certainly helped me as I was writing to think about, well, how would I address that? Or, what would someone who was reading this work critically, what would they say about this? So I find that, that very helpful for me. I think it helped me to write a better book in the end.
Great, thanks, Lance. And Jane, your experience?
I think it's really helpful when you trust your editor that they will select the right reviewers for your book. You want the reviewers to be people who are invested in the kinds of questions that you're asking and answering in your writing. And you want reviewers so if you have a book that's in a series, ideally those reviewers are familiar with the series, they're familiar with the goals of the series. So good reviewers are people who, if they have criticisms for you, they're going to give you really constructive feedback that's specific to the kinds of conversations that are happening in your discipline and that are happening in maybe even in the book series. And most of the time there's actually 2 rounds of review. If you give a few advanced chapters or proposal, you might get reviews back then, and then you get reviews back later. I especially appreciate, I'm always terrified of the reviews that come at the very end, because then I think, am I going to have to rewrite this whole book? Early reviews are so helpful, because these are usually brilliant scholars who are helping you think through the direction in which you should go with this project. And so I agree with Lance. It's free advice is amazing. The last thing I would say about it is that in some cases we get reviews from 2 different presses. So if you submit your book to more than one press in this, initial process before you decide, before you sign a contract, and that can be really an interesting thing too, because you see that, different editors have different styles and different presses work with different kinds of reviewers. And so I've gotten, with my last book, I had a set of reviews that really wanted the book to be a totally different book. And then I had a set of reviews that seemed to understand my project. And that helped me reading those and knowing, what's this journey going to be like with these 2 different presses, really helped me decide which way to go.
Yeah, and that's an important point, is picking the right reviewers to review the manuscript. And at Fordham, we often ask the author for suggestions. We don't always use them, but it's nice to know who they recommend. Maybe some people that we should avoid because they may have a certain argument against that type of theory or writing, and so you just don't want to approach them because right off the bat that they're not going to like the manuscript. So a combination of the 2. The other point I would make is the author response to the reviews is very, very important. So we take that response, we have to get two external readers' reports, the author's response, then we do an ed board memo, and we bring it to a faculty board, and we meet once a month. And I have to tell you, the faculty board really takes that response seriously, and they want to make sure that the author is engaged with those reports and they are willing and able to make the changes. And we always say this really makes the book stronger. And I've had board members say, I'd like to see a revised response to this and bring it back next month, because I don't think they've addressed all the concerns. So just something to think about. And one of the attendees asked a question, which I'll answer now, just so that, because it's a pretty quick answer. Someone said, how long does it take for peer review? And that's the one frustrating thing with editors and publishers, is that it's out of our control, right? Like, we give a deadline, we say 6 to 8 weeks, and it's really a service that scholars are doing. We don't pay them a lot of money, we pay them an honorarium, but they're doing it because they appreciate the value. And sometimes scholars are great and they'll return those reviews around in like 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes they go MIA and you're bugging them for months, and sometimes you have to find someone else to do a report. So that's really frustrating. So we give 6 to 8 weeks, but it could take longer. And Pam, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about the peer review from your perspective as more of a general interest author.
Well, first of all, it was very validating for me to see these brilliant scholars. I got really good reviews, and I'm not to say that I didn't think I deserved it, but it just made me feel like, okay, I'm on the right track. It was my first attempt. I don't know if I'm just a weirdo, overly confident or what, but I did it even when I applied to college. I was like going to Fordham, and that was literally the only place that I even tried to apply to. I did the same thing with my book. I just sent it out to one place. And so, I lucked out again. But yeah, I think that mentality kind of keeps me from getting too nervous and too anxious about what people will say. Is kind of just like, let me shoot my shot and see what happens. And then, I teach, so I'm extremely busy. And it did take a long time. And then on top of that, you guys already had your catalog for the fall. So then after it was already said and done, I still had to wait all the way until the spring for it to be published. But like I said, because I'm so busy, it just kind of still went fast for me. But yeah, it was totally validating. And, it made me realize that this is something, especially me being a new author, if I write, or when I write another one, I'm sure the experience will be a little different, especially if I know I'm going into it and, expecting to actually try to do a book proposal for an academic press. When I wrote it, I think that also made a difference. I didn't know where I was going to publish it, or even if I was going to publish it. So I didn't have those, I hope, let me say the right thing. I probably would have gotten to my head if I was thinking about all those things. But honestly, I was just writing it for myself, and I didn't anticipate it really going anywhere. So I just wrote truthfully. And I think that ended up being, working in my favor.
Great. Thanks, Pam. Appreciate it. So the next question is for the editors at the University Presses. How long have you worked at a university press? Have you always been in academic publishing? And if you can speak to this, what is your impression, of the difference between university presses and commercial houses? So Eric, we'll kick it off with you.
Well, so I've basically worked for university presses almost my whole career. My first job was with Springer back when it was still Springer Verlag, owned by the Germans in Heidelberg. I don't think that really counts. All the books were color coded by Field, which is not particularly commercial. So I've been at Columbia now for about 6 years. I was at Princeton for 6 years prior to that, Cambridge and Oxford. I can't imagine another, place I would want to be. I mean, I think that the University Press is a place that does exactly the kinds of books that Jane was talking about. I mean, we really prize those books that can kind of cross over. How do we elevate the voices of academics to get them into a more, public and popular conversation? I remember when Jane's book was, tweeted about by James Franco. That's the kind of thing that we love to see. University Presses, one of my authors, Dana Fisher, has a piece in the American Prospect today all about, is the Biden campaign doing what it is supposed to be doing, or are they doing the ground game right? Connected to her book, American Resistance, which we published in 2019. We are at this inflection point, I think, of the kind of popular media and the scholarly world, and can really act as a megaphone to help to amplify work that we all know about within the academic community, but people outside don't.
Thanks, Eric. And Eileen, anything you want to add to that?
I got my start in college textbook publishing, which is as exciting as that sounds. And then worked at Routledge, which is a US-based, but UK origin academic publisher, but is very much commercial. And I worked there for about 6 or 7 years, and then I left. I've been at NYU now for 17 years. But Fred and I worked together at Routledge. And it was a big transition when I first came to NYU, because previously I had all these very interesting conversations with authors about their books and what they cared about and their ideas. And they were wonderful conversations, but I didn't really share those very much with any of my colleagues. And then when I got to NYU, people were like, okay, but what's the contribution here, Eileen? Like, why should we publish this book? And I remember saying, like, you don't care, this isn't, because I really hadn't had that kind of interaction. It wasn't that they were devoid of scholarly interest. It wasn't as important. It was much more about the market and other kinds of issues. And so, the fact that NYU really does care about advancing ideas was surprising to me, but in a very welcome way. And so that's actually one of the great surprises, and perhaps one of the reasons I'm still there all these years later. And I think you would agree with that, Fred. I mean, what do you think?
No, I do agree with that. So Eileen and I worked at NYU before Fordham for about 5 years, and then at Routledge, and I've worked in both commercial and trade and academic publishers. I got my start after college at Wiley when they were in New York City. Now they're in Hoboken, New Jersey. So I've seen both, and it's a really great community, and the mission-driven versus the profit-driven really does exist at university presses. And it's really, when I first went from commercial press to university press to academic, I had a hard time grasping that. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you're subsidized by the university and you don't have to make a profit, you don't have to make money. And that was like driven in, for years when I was on the other side. And then now I've been longer in academic publishing and university presses. So I really like that part of it. And the peer review and that whole process, the faculty board and the community and working with faculty, I really enjoy that, and getting their perspective, and which you don't get at a commercial press. And the AUP, the Association of University Presses, is a really great community. It's very collaborative. You can, bounce ideas off each other. There's these networks that you can, the listservs, now it's on a commons, but you can ask questions and get answers. It's not this like very private, we're not going to share information. It's shared. It's great. So for all those reasons, I think it's a really good community. The next question for authors: from your experience as an academic university press author and observer of the publishing world, how do you feel that the academic publishing could improve when it comes to elevating new and groundbreaking voices and authors and ideas? So this is a really good question. Are there topics, are there subjects that we're overlooking? Are we excluding voices that we don't even know that we're excluding? It's kind of a reckoning that we're experiencing now with what's going on. So I think it'd be a good question to ask our authors. In your perspective, are there something that we're not doing? So why don't we? I don't think I start with Jane first, Jeff. So I'll be equitable. We'll start with Jane first.
I think that the obstacle that I see often for graduate students in particular who are writing excellent dissertations and want to publish them as books is that they just are not receiving the kind of mentorship that they need to know how to write a book and not a dissertation. So, and that really is across the board for people working in critical race studies, for people or critical ethnic studies, for people working in American studies, people working in queer studies. I think the expectations for a dissertation and the expectations for a publishable manuscript are different enough that many people get lost in that place of transition from one to the other. So maybe they meet with an editor and they just, don't know how to give that good elevator pitch of their book, or they just feel completely daunted by the kind of rewriting that the editor is going to ask them to do so that it doesn't read so much like a dissertation. I think the work needs to be done on both sides. So as an advisor for graduate students, I do everything in my power to get them to write a book instead of a dissertation so that by the time it gets to you all, it's closer to being ready. But I think being willing to hear that clunky pitch or look at that clunky dissertation and see what might be the dazzling project that is underneath all of that lit review or whatever is there that we know readers aren't actually going to want to buy. I think that's what I would like to see from university presses.
Great. Thanks, Jane. Pam, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Sure. I don't think it's that it's not inclusive enough. I think what the problem is getting over that hurdle of what you're working against, or what's working against you rather, is historically what people expect in an academic press, right? So, even if I think about my own personal situation, if I didn't think that it would be, I like I said, shot in the dark, and I was saying to you earlier, I think because I went to Fordham, that was why I even felt comfortable enough with even trying to submit the book to you, of course.
Right.
And a lot of times, especially when you're thinking about types of communities and people in these communities and giving them that voice, you could be, yes, I think what Jane said is totally right. You have to be prepared to be able to write a book. But for those of them that are prepared, but they're just used to seeing certain groups of people or types of work in a particular space, they won't think to even try to go in that lane, And that's no different than anything else in the world. Even as a teacher, I've been teaching for 18 years, I had to tell myself, okay, get out of your mind what you thought a teacher looks like. Because if I had that in my vision still, I would have probably never applied to be a teacher, because I'm thinking about all the teachers I had growing up. I didn't have Black teachers growing up. So it's about trying, to kind of move away from historically what we've seen. And I don't think it's that you guys are not doing enough. I think that sometimes it's on the reverse side, where people have that mentality of what they expect an academic press to want. So the thing that I would say would probably help with that is advertising, getting that, and this is a perfect, wonderful, forum for that. So these types of things is what is going to allow people to realize that they, we want you. Because without it, I don't think people will think that initially, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. Thanks. And Lance, do you have any thoughts on the topic?
Yes, I'll add that I think if we broaden our definition of scholarship or who a scholar is, I think that can be a way for university presses to, reach broader audiences or tap authors who kind of fall out of the conventional, professor, who I imagine is the primary type of authors that university presses work with. Certainly, I think for your average layperson, they may not be aware of how is the university press different than Macmillan or something, just your standard trade press. Certainly, before I went to college, I would not have known that. It's great that Pamela thought to publish with the university press, but I imagine that she's somewhat of an outlier. The average person who's not an academic probably isn't thinking about publishing with a university press or has any awareness of what the pros and cons might be. So thinking about being able to define scholarship more broadly and define different types of work as scholarship could be a way to, reach both a broader audience, but also include different types of voices than what might typically be included, or typically the types of authors that university presses work with. Great.
Thanks, Lance. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. I see them building there, so that's good. So publishing has come under deserved scrutiny for the whiteness of its employees and inequity among its authors, such as lower advances for authors of color, as written about in the New York Times, Publishers Weekly, the Times Literary Supplement, The Guardian, and other outlets. Hashtags such as Publishing So White and Publishing Paid Me have trended on social media. Academic publishing is not different, doesn't appear to be different. So how has your press intended to change these statistics in the years ahead? And I'll just briefly mention, what we're trying to do at Fordham. At a recent editorial meeting, we decided how could we combat, racism. Having the meeting, I think, was the first step in recognizing that not having a plan really contributes to racism. We recognize that we could do more to diversify our staff by working and collaborating with departments on campus, such as the Office of Multicultural Affairs and the Chief Diversity Officer. We could work harder to diversify our internship program. We decided to do away with unpaid internships, which deters some people from applying because they can't work without pay. We also recognize that we need to look for talent outside traditional channels to reach a wider and more diverse pool. So it's really a great start to the conversation. So those are some of the things that we did at Fordham. So I just wanted to hear from Eileen and Eric if they have initiatives in place at NYU and at Columbia, and if the authors have from their own experience, things that they think could contribute to diversity at a university press. So Eric, you want to kick it off?
Sure. I mean, I think we think about this topic in kind of an internal and external ways. So internally, we just began a 3-year strategic plan. Our three-year strategic plan has 3 goals, and one of our goals is the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, which is a carryover from a previous strategic plan. They've organized with an organization called REI, anti-racism training for the entirety of the staff, which will kind of carry over in 3 different segments. And a number of the staff members have already begun that. The other element too about, I think that's a challenge within, in the internal sense is just hiring. So the way in which you can diversify your staff is think about how you hire when someone leaves. And so in some elements, it's sort of a little bit of a waiting game as as people retire or leave or go elsewhere. Really think hard about how do you think outside the normal channels that you may have otherwise hired or looked for qualified candidates, and in terms of the hiring. The other element is external, and just thinking about the list, or how do we look out into the world and think about who our author base is, who are the folks that we market to. We have a very exciting plan for that at the moment that it's too soon to talk about, but hopefully you'll all hear about it very, very soon. But really just thinking about, we were talking before about one of the things that's a plus about university presses is that we don't really think about in terms of kind of financial capital, but to think about it is in sociological terms, we think a lot about reputational capital. And how do we often are kind of like playing a status game and chasing sort of usual suspects. And I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to think about that in a much broader way in terms of who we are thinking about as our author pool, and what are the topics that we're thinking about as being contributions to the scholarly conversation.
Great, thanks, Eric. And Eileen, comments from you?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely are looking at hiring practices and have put into place things that can help us to diversify staff in terms of race and ethnicity. And that is going forward, that is working. But it is also a strange thing in publishing that, as I said, I've been there for 17 years. And there's another editor who's been there for over 20, and there's another editor who's been there for over 20. So it is slow because we're
Turnover.
still there. So there's that. That's a little piece of it. But there's also, I mean, for us in terms of looking at our list and the content of our book and who our authors are, we're very diverse in terms of that. And there has always been, for my list, race, class, and gender is like my holy trinity. So it's always been there for me. And so, we feel pretty good about that. Recently, we've been talking too about reviewers, like who's reviewing who. And, we have to think about university presses as gatekeepers in a sense. And let's interrogate the gate itself and think about, are our practices doing things that are keeping people out or ideas out? Is there a problem there? And so I know AU Presses has been addressing this too recently. So that's something that's also on our radar. And I do think we talked about this with peer review. I think there's kind of like an art to peer review. And for me, that is very much a piece of it, is that I'm very conscious of who I'm sending to and how they may or may not receive the work of another scholar. And I try to balance that. I do want good critical feedback, but I also, I don't want to keep people out who shouldn't be kept out. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so I think that that's a piece of it too, but overall in publishing, they just did a study, and publishing is so white. It just is. And most of it is in New York, just like on the whole. And so, it's a problem for the industry at large, but there have been, recently changes at the top of various trade houses. And so it may be an interesting time to come. I think that these are some of the things that we are all looking to figure out if we can make changes in.
Nope, that's true. And I think even in university press publishing, two people of color were appointed directors. Wayne State in Detroit was a recent one. So that's a move in the right direction. I see a bunch of questions gathering in the Q&A and chat section, but I want to give Pam and Jane and Lance, do you have anything you want to add before we open it up to the audience? Nope. Okay. So why don't we bring Kate back, who has been monitoring the chat and the Q&A section, and you want to throw some questions out there, Kate?
Sure. Okay, I see the first question here is it acceptable to submit a sample chapter and outline to more than one university press?
Eileen, you want to answer that one?
Yes. You should, but you just need to tell us. Just always be very transparent about what you're doing. And when I get something in, usually if they say, I'm very excited about NYU Press, but I also want to let you know that I've contacted a select, and you shouldn't do like 7, like that's probably too many for you. You know, maybe do 3 or 4, a select number of presses also, and they're looking at it too. And then you kind of take it from there. And then you let the editor, some editors may say, I would like to review this exclusively. Some editors may say, okay, that's fine. We can compete with this other press. But it's all about just the transparency of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would say too, especially if you're a first-time author, I think it's really useful to submit to more than one publisher, because we all have different styles of working. And you know, one person's style may mesh really well with one editor, and another, you know, and another's won't. And you want to kind of find out what that experience is going to be like. And this is the only opportunity, you know, in that very beginning to really get a sense of, right, let me look through the window and see what's going on here. Because once you do commit to a publisher, it's a long process. You know, writing a manuscript takes, you know, a year plus. The production process takes, you know, almost a year. So you, however long you've spent writing that, you know, manuscript or working on the ideas to get to that point, you know, you're talking about years of your life. So you want to make sure that you're putting that really precious work in the right hands.
Right. Yeah. I sometimes say to authors that are, you know, at the proposal stage, and, you know, when we used to be able to go to academic conferences in person and they're doing the rounds at the tables with the different editors, I'm like, it's like speed dating. It's like, you know, you're trying to get a feel. And like Eric said, it's a long-term relationship. So you want to make sure that it's a good fit. And usually when it gets to peer review, I try to say, can we be exclusive now? Can you commit to me now? So that's kind of like the analogy. Kate?
Okay, I'll follow up with the next question. From the time one submits a book proposal and 1 to 2 sample chapters, when would you expect the book manuscript, the full manuscript, to be submitted for peer review?
Anyone? Eric, you want to take that one?
Yeah, we always like start off in our contract with a year. And the reason being is that it's far enough to be accomplishable, not so far that something is going to get lost. And then the expectation is that will actually probably not happen. That it will actually probably take longer. I think one of the challenges of working with academics as authors is that academics are always pulled in multiple different directions, and writing their book is not always the top priority. Teaching students, advising students, journal articles, and you're supposed to turn in your manuscript in a couple months, and you get that that R&R that you've been expecting, and all of a sudden you have to turn your attention to that. So we have to be somewhat flexible. So that's why I say I always give it a year, and it's always a little bit longer than that.
Okay. And as a follow-up to that question, do you also send the book proposal and sample book chapters for peer review? If so, what kind of sample book chapters you'd prefer and how many?
Send in the good ones. It depends on the project. But you should send the strong ones. Usually you're not sending the conclusion because that doesn't really make sense. But I would say it depends on the project and the editor, but you should have 2 to 3 sample chapters for reviewers. And you want to have chapters that are good, that you've put time and effort into, because then you want to see how people react to them and what kind of feedback you get. So.
Right, and normally,
Introduction is usually good for descriptive writing and try, to give a sense of like your overall argument and the framing of the project. Though introductions are almost always rewritten, so the introduction, will change. But the good ones, to my mind, are always the ones that are kind of the substantive chapters that your peer reviewers are going to want to engage most with. It shows both what is the evidence and the argument and the data that you're able to convey, and how, and something about the methodology and how you're able to make that case. So something nice and strong and substantive.
Okay. All right. I'm moving on to a new question here. There are this is for you, Fred. There are multiple books on some topics, figures. For example, Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln. How can an author effectively propose their book if the same subject matter has already been published?
yeah, I mean, there are a lot of books or a lot of topics that are covered, but if you have a unique angle on that particular topic, then that's what you put forward immediately, whether in your email pitch, which is going to be your first entry point into an editor. And now that we're all working remotely, most of our submissions are through email. When I first started at Fordham and other places, you got the OT, the over the transom proposals, which were paper. And even when I first started Fordham, we didn't even accept email submissions. That is completely gone, and it's all through email now. So get the editor in the email pitch immediately. And what makes it different than the other books out there? We're open to books about same topics, but as long as it's covered differently, what's the angle? And that should be front and center when you approach the editor.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. I see. Okay, here's a question on how does a person get a job working at a university press? I'm a college professor, professional writer, and journalist looking for a career change.
Good question.
That is a good question. I mean, I describe publishing as kind of like a trade profession, because you really have to, you're sort of like, you train someone and you mentor them. And a lot of people come in, at the lower level, like they start as either internships or they start as assistants, and then you work your way up. So that's one of the challenges about some of the career changes, is that because you're not going to know anything about publishing if you're making a career change. So, are you willing to do that? And I don't know, you have to consider that. But sometimes you can, reach out and a lot of press have internships, sometimes paid, sometimes not paid, that you can take. But I don't know. I mean, are there many people that my colleagues know that start a little higher up? I don't know that many.
It's interesting that the new director of the University of Virginia Press is a professor at UVA, and she took over the directorship at the press, which is interesting. I don't know if that's ever, could have happened before, I don't know, but it was recent. So she was actually on their board, and then she became the director, which I thought was very interesting. But beyond that, I don't know, at the higher level. Eric, do you have any?
No, I think Eileen's point about it being like a kind of a trade, a profession, I think is a really good one, in the sense that the analogy I always use is like we're all like kind of like line cooks, and when you first start out, you have to, you're doing all the prep work, and part of the reason of doing all that prep work is that it becomes second nature for that time when you're actually on the line, and all of a sudden there's an emergency and you have to do the prep work also, and you just do it without having to think about it. You just kind of learn it through repetition, and things that seem like, oh, this is a crazy situation, like, no, this actually happens all the time. You just be able to, you roll with it. So that said, from a kind of a practical standpoint, or just, I mean, just like literally, how would you go about doing it? The AUP, aupresses.org website has a job bank listing, and that's a really good place to go to see what the kinds of jobs are that are available. Most people generally think of publishing as editors, but we only are probably a third of the staff, if that much of the staff of a press. And there are marketing people, and there's a need for sales folks, and people in the production department. And so the strengths that you may have that are atypical or non-publishing strengths may be a strength in another area. And the University Press world covers the entirety of the country, and then also internationally as well. And so there's a need for people in kind of smaller, out of the way presses, and it may be the case if a press that has 3 staff members needs somebody who has this wealth of practical experience in some other capacity. So I would say just go to the AUP website and look for jobs that seem like they're interesting, and just take a chance.
Hey, Kate, just because we only have a few more minutes, are there any questions that are specifically aimed at the authors, just to give them a chance to answer if there are any?
Let's see. There's actually, I see one here for the acquisition editors. How, if at all, do you work with independent developmental editors when your authors have received mixed readers' reports and you're committed to the project, but due to your own signing goals, you may not be able to guide the developmental editing yourself? In other words, how do you partner with academic developmental editors, independent or in-house?
I mean, that's a very rare case. That just doesn't happen a lot. So I would hope we partner well.
I would say the development, the development editors, you're looking at them. We don't have development editors on staff, and it's usually what part of it. What I tell authors all the time is our responsibility as acquisitions editors is to get your book through the process, and if that entails us really doing a very thorough developmental edit on a manuscript, if that's what it's going to take, then that's what we need to do. Oftentimes authors will hire a developmental editor on their own, so that's it's more common in that way, that the relationship between developmental editors is directly with the author and not with the publisher.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Eric. I've had a few authors where the work, the manuscript needed a lot of work before we could even get it to peer review, and it was more than in-house could handle. And I recommended that it go to a developmental editor, that they would have to pay for it. I could recommend someone, and they did it. A couple authors did that, and it worked out really well, and we published them. But it was much more of a trade author. I see one for new authors, or for authors, what is the most important for you to have from your editor? So this is for Pam and Lance and Jane. What would you say is the most important thing to have from your editor? So why don't we end there, because we only have 2 more minutes. So Jane, you want to start?
The question was, what's the most important thing to have from your editor?
Yeah. What's the most important thing, or to hear from your editor, advice, guidance?
Mm-hmm. I think having an editor who is excited about your book is probably the most important thing. Read the acknowledgments section of books. I get that sense from other writers as well, that there are moments when you think you want to just throw your manuscript in the trash, and have the stamina or confidence to continue, and having a supportive editor who just tells you in an email that they're often, Eileen would say something like, reading your manuscript is making me smile, or I'm laughing She's really good at giving some like emotive response. And so I think that makes all the difference.
Yeah, great. Pamela or Lance, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Communication, definitely communication and flexibility, because it was interesting because I'm obviously teaching While Black is the name of my book, and there were moments where I would be referencing something and the editor was unsure of what I meant or asked me to clarify, and because of me coming from my background, I didn't even think that I didn't even expect that I would have to explain that.
Right.
So then we had our notes back and forth, and he would send me back and forth and, make comments in little sections and say, what exactly do you mean here? Or can you clarify for me? Or where he thought he might have fixed something. And I'm like, no, actually, no, like that's not fixing anything. You need to change that back. And being able to have that autonomy and not feel like someone is changing what I wrote. That was really important to me, and that was something that actually made me feel safe. That even if someone had made a suggestion, I still, as the author, had the ability to say, no, actually, I think I want to keep it as is, and that was dope. I loved it.
Great.
Yeah, I would echo much of what Jane said, and to a lesser extent, Pamela. Just the idea of the editor, providing support, helping you to make sense of the peer review. Sometimes reviewers will give you conflicting advice or conflicting opinions. So just sort of a sounding board and someone to help you, make sense of the process. I found that to be most helpful and very important. And so it almost like the editor becomes like your coach or teammate or something like that. It feels like someone that's helping push you over the finish line, so to speak.
Great. So I think that was the last question that we have time for, right, Kate? It's
Yes.
It's 8:02, and I mean we could carry on the conversation, but we only have an hour, and there were a ton of questions, which is great that people were so engaged and so involved with our conversation. And so Lance and Jane and Pam, thank you so much for taking the time out as authors, and Eileen and Eric and Kate for helping moderate the questions. This is a great discussion, and I'm glad that
Thank you, Fred.
Sure. Thank you. And I'm sure you're all hungry and want to have dinner, because I know I am. So, and thanks to the audience for participating. We had a nice crowd tonight, and I'm sorry we couldn't answer all the questions, but if you ever want to reach out to us, I'm sure we would be able to answer them. So
Yes.
have a great evening, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.